College of Music, one of the oldest music conservatories in the UK. Students who graduate from here go on to become professional musicians. You walk through the front door and you hear all the different sorts of musical instruments playing simultaneously. Take a ride in the lift and you hear different instruments practicing on each floor. Everyone here has got a practice or rehearsal schedule of their own. They're all practically really busy trying to improve their instrumental playing. But what exactly do they practice on for hours and hours each day?
As a whole, I think practicing at this level is not merely just trying to make it accurate. It's more on focusing on that last tiny portion that makes your next performance a really great one rather than just a good one. That's hard. To me, I think performances that's great are ones that are more emotionally satisfying. Music is a language and it's a way of communication, and people who perfect the art are usually people who can communicate most effectively in this type of language through music. And I think this is the biggest challenge when you are playing music, trying to communicate what you have in your head into the sound to the audience. Well, I think fundamentally it all has to do with techniques, because techniques to me is the bridge between your feelings and the sounds that you create from the instrument. Obviously, it's all got to do with how you move your body to create that sound. And that's precisely the difference between just merely making a sound out of the instrument versus a true musical art. There are a few actually, and I think because these treatises are written in the perspective of the author, it would be beneficial to the musicians who want to learn from them to do a bit of analyzing before they actually absorb all the information that's in the book. And that being said, I think Alexander Technique gives you a really good set of tools for you to look at a treatise critically. Alexander Technique teaches you to be kind of conscious and aware of yourself. Because a lot of the times we musicians play our instruments autonomously because we've been playing it for so long. It's possible for us to play an instrument and not even think about it. But Alexander Technique takes us away from that. It teaches us to be conscious, always present with ourselves. One of the central themes of Alexander Technique is to focus on the primary control, and that is the relationship between the head, neck, and the back. So this being the central axis of the body, if you tense the central axis area, then there's a tendency that you are tensing in other parts of the body too. In order to change your old habits, the Alexander Technique helps us by making sure that we're aware of our present self and that we're noticing our good and bad habits. And if they're bad, of course, it teaches us to inhibit these and try to finally consciously find a way to embed new and better habits through the use of direction. Alexander Technique doesn't go into specific details of instrumental playing. Rather, it's a basic set of overlying set of rules and principles that will work effectively with any instrumental playing. I feel Alexander Technique is like trying to widen a tunnel, so you are able to perform all your techniques through that tunnel with ease and effectively, and of course whatever you want to achieve in front of your audience through the sound, through your technique, would be possible and would not be hindered by your bad habits.
Tobias Mattei was a pianist, teacher, and composer. He lived from 1855 to 1945. He studied and taught at the Royal Academy of Music. Throughout his teaching years at the Academy, He observed and analyzed his piano students. In 1903, he published his first book on the pianoforte technique. It was called The Act of Touch in All Its Diversity. This was followed by 7 more books dealing more or less with pianoforte techniques. His last book was published in 1932. It was called The Visible and Invisible in Piano Technique. Mattei had combined all of his knowledge on pianoforte playing into this very book. This is a quick snapshot of what he offers in the book. It begins with the more general topics such as what he considers is the meaning and purpose of technique, how to use the piano key, the accuracy of tone and the link between music and technique, how to use the limb and muscles, and lastly, the physiological details of piano playing. One of the things Mattei stresses so much about in his book is unnecessary tension and how this is not helpful when it comes to playing the piano. Relaxation to him implies elimination of all unnecessary exertions, seizing the needed impulses at the right moment. Seizing the limb support when not needed. As a general rule, however, we must never allow the opposite exertions to be provoked into action along with the required ones. Doing so results in stiffness, a tug of war within the limb or portion of it. Mattei further suggests that it is not possible to direct our muscles to move in a certain way, meaning that we can't think of or wish that our biceps contract and hope that it will move. Our brain is only capable of instructing limb exertions or movements. Therefore, to teach students which parts to stress and which to relax, knowledge of the limb is beneficial. Only by the sensations experienced can we realize what the limb conditions for good and bad playing are. And by calling up or recalling such sensations, we can then reproduce the effects and can then teach it to others. Mattei's teachings are comparable to Alexander technique. Both agree on how knowledge of the limb is beneficial to instrumental playing. Alexander technique, however, focuses on body mapping. This is the knowledge of where each body part originates, which then leads on to knowledge about how it moves. Alexander believed in faulty sensory perception. Mattei's concept of teaching the correct sensory for each movement at the piano marry up very nicely. Alexander technique, however, utilizes direction as a means in teaching or embedding the correct limb movement. Mattei stresses a lot on avoiding unnecessary tension. However, he does not go into details about freeing up the primary control, which Alexander technique stresses on. This has an effect on freeing up the rest of the body. When this happens, we get a more coordinated self. One of the major faults of pianists, as pointed out by Mattei, is that they do not realize the tendency for pronation of the forearm. This is the normal position of the arm. To play the piano, we need to pronate the forearm so that the hand is parallel to the keyboard. Unfortunately, there's a correct way and an incorrect way to achieve this. Mattei suggests a way to test this. You fold your arm in front of your chest and rotate the forearm easily and freely as you would in a tremolo. You are bound to use only the forearm rotation here because the arm is bent at a right angle. Now stretch the whole arm straight in front of you, and again with forearm only, execute your free and easy tremolo movement. Now instead of this comfortable forearm tremolo, substitute with a twisting of the whole arm from the shoulder socket. You are now using your upper arm rotation. Notice how this is more clumsy and less natural than the forearm tremolo. The Alexander technique, however, mentions a different experiment that similarly tests the upper arm usage in forearm pronation. With your forearms on a table, turn your hand over. If it flops with the little finger staying more or less where they are, this is correct. It is incorrect when the little fingers slide from side to side. This means that you are using the upper arms to make the turns. What Mattei discussed in his book is, in fact, one of Alexander's main principles: use affects functioning. Successful use of the forearm rotation allows pianists to strengthen their fourth and fifth fingers. With the hand lying loosely on the keyboard, it will quite naturally roll upward onto its side, given that you cease the slight rotatory exertion towards the thumb. Now at that very moment, you also exert the little finger. It will act as a strut and will prevent the hand from rolling. You can't really see any rotatory movement, but you do feel the stress in the direction of the little finger. The mind is a weird thing. You cannot really say to yourself to play the correct notes and expect it to obey itself. When playing a series of octaves such as these, you need to guide it indirectly. Mattei suggests giving directions to your octave passages. When the octave passage travels outward, you must feel your way along with the thumb. Doing it the other way around causes tension. But when it moves inwards, the fourth and fifth fingers must act as guidance. And again, doing it with the thumb causes a lot of tension and stiffness. Alexander's technique stresses that end gaining causes bad habitual response to emerge. To inhibit the response, Alexander's technique suggested means whereby principle, in which we realize that the end is not a single isolated end, but rather a series of coordinated tiny acts. The successes of these tiny acts then form the end result, which is playing the octave correctly. Finally, Mattei talks a little bit about sitting position. He writes in capital letters, "Do not sit like a hunchback," saying that it is not healthy and of no profit technically. Freely and easily keep your body erect. A slight leaning forwards from the hips might be a comfortable option for some. Interestingly, the short section is the only part in the book in which he mentions posture. His mention of leaning forwards as a comfortable option is misleading in some ways. Be comfortable is good, especially in front of your own instrument. But this is subjective, and it relies a lot on our sensory perception, which, according to Alexander, can be deceptive. There is no mention of the balance when the body is kept erect, or how we might spot this balance in searching for the correct position. Through body mapping, a rough estimate would be to look at our sitting position from the side and making sure that our head is situated on the same axis as the hip joints. Playing freely with relaxations of the upper arm and shoulder is likely to tempt you to relax also the muscles that keep your body erect. Have a care this does not happen. Is this necessarily true? It is true that we don't want to be sitting like a hunchback, because that will surely result poorly in our balance. However, saying that relaxations of the upper arm and shoulder will make this happen is not quite accurate, since we do not really want to tighten both of them. This is where the use of directions and body mapping will be very useful. Students who are able to imagine the head releasing forward and up in the direction of where the spine is pointing will in itself cause the back to lengthen and widen. As a secondary direction, imagine the shoulders moving away from each other and away from the head. This will allow you to be free, yet still with an upright body position. Alexander technique is not only useful for musicians. The principles can also be applied to dancers and actors.